All right, I'm back from a snow day that actually did not happen, so we had a free day off yesterday. Today I'm going to do some more problems, a couple of ACT questions that will be dealing with fractions. So I always like to jump back to fractions as much as possible. So this question asks, what fraction lies exactly halfway between 2/3 and 3/4? You have 3/5, you have 5/6, 7/12, 9/16, and 17 out of 24. So before I get into the answer itself, I want to get into the thought process behind it. The first thing I want to zero in on is the fact that it asks for what lies halfway between. All right. So when most people see fractions, the first thing they do is get a little uneasy. And then at that point, it's all about they're going to guess or they're going to skip it. All right. So what I urge you to do is, if you understand how to find anything that's halfway between, just test that out with just some whole numbers. All right. Some whole numbers. That's a good way to just kind of get your mind going on how you go through the process, whether it's a fraction or not. So we're going to look at this one. This is going to be what gets our mind going on how we think about this problem. So if the question were to ask you what's halfway between 5 and 9, the easiest thing to do is just count it out from 5 to 9. And if you look right there, you'll see that 7 is in the middle, right? That's easy to tell, right? It's very simple to tell. But there's a numerical way of showing how you get to that 7. All right, so since we were trying to find what's in between 5 and 9, like halfway in between, we add 5 and 9 and get 14. Whatever that answer is, we divide it by 2 and we get 7. That's why we're able to know that 7 sits in the middle. And this works at every single time that you're asked about something that's halfway in between. Geometry, we call those midpoints, all right? So this is a midpoint question. What lies halfway between? And it follows that process every single time. So that's the process. To figure out midpoints, you add, then you divide by 2. That's it. You add, and then you divide by 2. Those are arithmetic skills, all right? Arithmetic skills. So that example that I just knocked out has everything to do with the question that's presented on the ACT practice problem that we're looking at. It's not about the fraction itself. If you focus on the fraction, you're going to miss the whole point. The whole point was the process behind getting it right remains the same no matter what numbers you use. It doesn't matter if it's a fraction, it doesn't matter if it's a decimal, whole numbers, it doesn't matter which integers you're using. As long as you add and then divide by 2, you'll get to the midpoint, all right? You add and you divide by 2. That's what it has to do with, all right? All right, so we're looking at the example now. We have to find a midpoint between 2/3 and 3/4. Between 2/3 and 3/4. Remember, the first thing we're going to do is add. Remember, the first thing we have to do is add. If I'm adding 2/3 and 3/4, remember, we can't add these two unless we have a common denominator. And remember, the common denominator or our common multiple is a 12, all right? 12 is the common denominator. So what I want to do is I want to sit on this 12 for 1 second, because this one fact alone, this one thing that we just figured out with this 12 is going to help us eliminate maybe 3 of those selections. So we're going to take a look at that. If the least common multiple is 12, then there's certain denominators that must happen. And those denominators that must happen must be multiples of 12. So 3/5 would not even fit in there, right? Because that's not even a multiple of 12. 6 is not a multiple of 12. 16 is not a multiple of 12. So it breaks us down to at least one of these two choices, just knowing that we have a multiple of 12 as our denominator. I don't know if you remember this, but this is something that we did talk about, or I talked about in a previous video with my fractions. Anytime you add two fractions up, you can do this real quick thing. I like to say crisscross smile. So if I multiply those two, I get an 8. I multiply those two, I get a 9. I multiply these two, I get a 12. So 8 plus 9 is 17 over 12. Now, most people, they'll get so excited with this 17 over 12 you might pick this one if you're not paying attention, right? If you're looking at that 12 and you see a 17, you might not even notice that doesn't say 17. You see what I'm saying? So you got to be real careful at this point. Make sure that when you're doing this, that you're following the process all the way through. Remember, it's two things we have to do. One, we have to add, then we have to divide by 2. You get what I'm saying? All we did was add. We have not divided that by 2 yet. I have a 17 over 12. If I'm dividing by 2, if you're dealing with a fraction, dividing by 2 means basically you just have to double your denominator. All right, double the denominator. That is dividing by 2. So basically I can just double that one, and that's the same thing as dividing everything by 2. So what we're looking at really is a 17 over 24. 17 over 24 is exactly in the middle. All right, so I mapped everything out into my software. As you can see, on one end, I have my 2/3. Right here, I have my 3/4, and I know my midpoint should be somewhere right here in the middle. The question is, what is that value? So we just did it on the board. We know that the value is 17 over 24. If I tell it to show my midpoint, there's the midpoint right there in the middle. And it has a value of 17 over 24. So yes, 17 over 24 is directly in the middle of 2/3 and 3/4. The reason why I spend so much time explaining the thought process behind how these numbers work is because if you have a calculator like this on the ACT, which is perfectly fine, this is allowed. If you don't know how the process works, you wouldn't even know to punch this in. See what I'm saying? So knowing the process is knowing what to tell your tools. See what I'm saying? So it's like a language. If you don't know how to give it the correct instruction to do the mathematics, it doesn't matter if you have a calculator or not. So the calculator does help, but if you don't understand how to tell it what to do, this will never be useful. So this is one of my calculators I love using, the Casio. I have it punched in. I'm doing my fractions. I'm adding them up. I'm dividing by 2. And once again, I got the same thing. So there's reasons why these numbers show up. And that's what I try to show you on the board. All right. You can always do a search on YouTube. BJ Jeffries. BJ space JEFFRIES. This should pop up, but look for this picture right there. That's my channel. That's the one you want to subscribe to.